Hey, welcome to Adventures in Angular, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things Angular related. This show is produced by two companies, Top End Devs and Envoyed. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Envoyed, which provides remote design and software development services on a performance basis, where clients only pay for delivered tasks. In today's episode, we will talk about several utility libraries for Angular. And what they all have in common is that they were all created or co created by Alex Inkin. We're going to talk about mainly three projects that he has. One is called Taiga UI. It's a powerful set of open source components for Angular. We're also going to talk about Web APIs for Angular, which is a set of utility wrappers for Angular on top of native web technologies. And we're also going to talk about Mosquito, which is an input masking library. Okay, so my name is Lucas Paganini, as you may be aware. I'm the CEO of Envoyed and your host in the podcast. Joining me in today's episode is obviously Alexander Inkin.
Hey everyone.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a brief introduction of Alex, but I would also like you to tell us a bit more about yourself, Alex. But what I think are important highlights for everybody to know is, first off, Alex is an Angular wizard. So he is an Angular GDE already certified. He works as a front-end developer. He is also a tech writer, musician, and an open source author. And yeah, this is just the main highlight. But how would you present yourself, Alex?
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. My most work is done in open source for like past maybe 3 years or so. That's because we pushed our main project Taiga UI to open source like 3 years ago, and ever since then I've been working full time on open source projects, and some of them were released prior to that. Most of them came out from the Taiga UI development because it's like a huge project, and myself and the guys I work with are big fans of decomposition. So before Taiga UI went live, we had a lot of small libraries that we published separately, like ones that focus on particular situations, regardless of your UI library. Like we have ng event plugins library, which extends Angular event handling with some really helpful quality of life stuff, like you could write click point stop to stop event propagation, or click point prevent to prevent default. You can run your handlers outside of change detection and other things like that. One thing that was really impossible to do in Angular before is to listen to events in capture phase. So with our library, you can just right click point capture, and it would listen to events when they traverse DOM downwards in the capture phase, not bubbling up. So that's really helpful in some case when you want to, for example, react to some event before any other handler, because that would happen earlier. So once we had a few of those libraries up, we had enough experience in maintaining open source projects with change logs, clear releases, pre-tier linters, and all that. So we decided it's time to push our main stuff up, and it took us maybe a year to prepare it properly so that everybody's happy with it. And we had our designers to come up with a public theme, because we didn't want the proprietary theme to be released to open source. And mostly everybody was supportive, which is cool, because I mean, managers in our team were mostly engineers, and they see the value in open source. So there was not much pushback for that, and I'm really glad now that it's up there on GitHub, because it's a huge motivation to work when it's out there in the public. So I'm an excited open source contributor, mostly for my own projects though, but I did some contributions to other projects as well.
Nice, nice. And I think I can speak for everyone when we say that we are glad that these projects were open sourced. So yeah, congrats to you, but also to the company that is supporting some of these projects, because it's really cool. Not every company is going to pay their developers and their team members to work on open source projects. So it's really nice that you are on a team and on a company that values open source. Nice. Okay, and yeah, so let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about, and so let's see from these three libraries, which one do you think is the most interesting for us to get started, to introduce everyone to it?
I think web APIs for Angular is probably the most helpful to most people because it doesn't have any ties to some particular design or anything like that. It's a bunch of very isolated tiny libraries that can help you work with many native APIs that are not that well suited for Angular because native API uses a lot of callbacks and imperative programming. In Angular, we use RxJS streams, we use declarative directives. So the paradigm is a bit different, and many developers who work with frameworks don't really go deep into the native behavior of JavaScript and DOM events and all that. So it's going to make their lives a lot easier. So this is probably the project I would like people to check out first. It most likely has something that you would need to use.
Okay, let's get into it. So first, let's just talk about it from end user perspective, like the value that it provides. Not everyone will be able to get on the website right now. So if you can just look for web APIs for Angular on Google. You're probably going to arrive at this website. But if not, the link is ng-web-apis.github.io. And as soon as you enter this page, you're going to see a list of all the libraries that are supported into this umbrella of web API wrappers. And from here, we have things to interact with the audio, the web audio API, the Canvas API, the intersection observer, geolocalization, MIDI. So for all of you musicians out there, or just anyone that wants users to be able to control the application with other peripherals, not just mouse and keyboard, that might be interesting to you. There's also utilities for mutation observer, payment request, resize observer, web storage API, web workers. There's just so much here. Which of
Actually, I think
these?
it's an
Yeah.
old link. It used to be a whole organization on GitHub with separate repositories, but we decided to move it in one monorepo. And I think that link that you told is the old one, so it might not have everything to have at the moment. The new one is on Taiga Family GitHub. Um,
You
I
are
don't know where
correct.
to send you the link. I mean, I'll send it to you in chat. Maybe you can share it some later in the description or something like that. So since then, we've added like a couple. One is the View Transition API, which is new hip stuff on Twitter. It's only supported in Chrome, but we made some little wrapper to use it in Angular and RxJS, and also notification API, so you can use RxJS streams to show notifications on your website. And this thing keeps growing and growing because whenever we need some API in our projects, in our work, we just go there and add it because it's going to be helpful to somebody, not just us. And it's great to have this not in some project where it's used, but like an as isolated API. And also we have some experience with how to make it usable, like to support most of use cases because uh, Taiga UI, the library that we worked on, has a lot of components, and there's a lot of various scenarios that people use them with. So we had a lot of practice making the APIs flexible. So that's kind of our thing. So you should
Nice.
keep an eye on that repository. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. There are indeed things that in this new link that you sent that weren't in the previous one. By the way, I got the link from the previous one from your website. So you have your My Project
Yeah, I need to
section.
update it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was from there. But anyways, yeah, man, I was already thinking that there were too much, and now there's even more. But that's awesome. I
Feel
was
free to
going
create
to.
an issue if you need some API that is not yet supported.
I will. I will. Um, so the one that I was going to ask was the view transition. I was going to ask if you somehow made it increase the browser support through it, or if you
Oh,
just expect
we don't
browsers to support.
interfere with any of the native APIs. We just make wrappers for them. One thing that is like a, how to say it, but the exception is the one that is currently in the works, or it was just released, the screen orientation API, because it was available previously, but the API was different, and now there's official one with window.screen.orientation, and we've made the fallback to the old API if your browser don't have the recent one, but mostly we just make the recent version of the code. So if you use some old browser, check out the browser support for native API because we don't provide any polyfills, but you can find them and include them separately.
Which of these libraries do you see people using the most on their projects?
Surprisingly, Intersection Observer, I think, is one of the most downloaded and used. Also, definitely the common library, the one that we base all of other libraries upon. It's basically just a collection of tokens for global objects like window, navigator, user agent, and all that. Because in Angular, you're not really supposed to access global objects directly because you can run the server-side rendering, or you can have a need to test them in unit tests, and it would be much easier to uh, supplement your app with fallbacks and mocks for server side. So this is when this whole thing started, because in Angular you have a document token, which is just the document object, but there's a lot of other global objects that you need to use, and uh, once we started to put them in one big collection, we decided to release it into open source, and then all other libraries, they rely on the common one, which has like maybe 10 tokens: window, user agent, location, and all that. So this one is obviously the most downloaded because everything else relies upon it. But from the general collection of all those APIs, Intersection Observer is probably the most used. I personally use Resize Observer a lot because the fact that you don't have a resize event for an element just for the window is very restricting, especially if you're making a UI library that should work in different devices, different screen resolutions. So that one is very useful too.
Okay, so you're basically using the Resize Observer wrapper as a fallback for the lack of browser support for container queries.
Kind of like that, yeah. When we created it, I think there was no container queries at all. Maybe there were some under some flag in Chrome or something like that. But it's a good example of how our libraries work, because the underlying thing is basically an RxJS wrapper on the native API. Instead of callbacks, we have a RxJS stream, and we have a directive that exposes this stream as an output, so you can use it in templates. And this whole thing is very, very tiny, and highlights the approach very well. So whenever you have a callback in native API, you're going to use a RxJS stream. Whenever you have some classes that are created imperatively, like observers, instead of new resize observer, you would use a directive to put it on a HTML element that you want to observe. And we also use DI for configurations that you can provide with directives as well. So that's a good thing to dig into the source code to see probably good patterns for your own development.
Gotcha. By the way, this might be a little sidetracked, but now I wanted to ask you if you have actually used container queries in a real project thus far, because the last time I checked, the browser support was very little, but I just opened can I use and I was like, wait, what? Is that correct? It's 88% of global browser support for container queries. Is just it seems that it's only not supported on Internet Explorer, but other than that, everything else is green. So that's another subject on its own, but it may be really interested in using the native
Yeah,
implementation of
I
container
also often
queries.
get surprised by this page because I mean time flies really fast, and whenever I thought like someday we can use native dialogues and voila, they're all available in all browsers already. So the problem here is that our library has to support older browsers as well, and we have a lot of customers and clients using old Safari. So that's the biggest bottleneck. We have to support Safari 12, and then the next major release we probably bump it to Safari 13. And back then it's like 3 4 years ago, I think four, and a lot of those things were not there yet. So that's why I might be a little rusty on the modern API because I just have no way to use them, and whenever I use them I just play around on CodePen or StackBlitz to just try it out, maybe create some helpful tip or some cool demo or something like that, but not in my production code.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, so you personally use the Resize Observer the most. Most people installing the libraries are using the Intersection Observer the most. That's interesting. I also note that you have one for Universal. Um, what does it do exactly?
It's a type safe fallbacks for server-side renderer for all the global objects like window, user agent, vacation, all that. Some things you can grab from the request on the server side. So whenever you serve your page from the server, you can grab the headers, I think, right, from the request and see what browser the user is using through the user agent. So these things you can provide on the server, even though it's like a client side thing. And for the other things, it's mostly just a type safe fallback. So you will never run into cannot read properties if undefined or anything like that if you serve your app both client side and server side. And these are basically just fallbacks.
Gotcha. But still, people can't just directly reference window, right? They are gonna have
Yes.
to inject it into the constructor and
Yeah,
then.
they will inject a token window that is from the common package, and you will just install the universal package in your server part of your app. You will just import the module with all the tokens like window and user agent and all that with the server side fallbacks. So during your app development, it doesn't really matter if you're working with server side or client side code. It would be seamless. That's the one of the biggest advantages of dependency injection in such cases. The second one is the easy to unit test your code because you can substitute all those things with fallbacks, with mocks, and just test that your app working properly.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, so it's not that the universal library exposes extra tokens, it just exposes server side versions of the tokens that are
Yes, that's
exported by the
correct.
common. Okay, okay, that
And
makes
it
sense.
also has a very tiny polyfill JS file that just creates mocks of global classes like intersection observer in a type safe manner. So it would just not crash if you reference that class and it's undefined.
Okay. You also mentioned one for notifications.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the new one, so it's not on that page.
okay, but it's already stable. Like people can
Yes, it's
already use
stable in
it.
terms of notifications API, but we also wanted to include push, so you can do that with a service worker. Unfortunately, the Angular service that they provide does not have a notification close event, and we really need that. So we haven't yet finalized the second half of this app. So this library, I mean. And the guy that was working on it went to the vacation to clear his head because that's like a lot of thing to think about. So this
You
guy
said
is
that you already have support for the web notifications API, but not for push notifications.
yes, that's right.
Um,
The API there is quite different, even though they at the end they look the same. It's a the notification in your screen. The notification API has one thing, and the push API has very different API. Instead of like listening to click events on your notification instance to see what button user clicked, you have a one huge stream of click events, and you have to determine which notification was clicked and all that. So that's what I kind of often have to grapple with, is that native APIs, they were designed some time ago, then they were improved because people tried them and find some things not easy to use, and then they were improved again and something like that. It's mostly visible in the audio API because at some point it was callbacks, then it was promises, then uh, they they just keep adding methods to change parameters in like exponential linear fashion, and to be able to track the callbacks of those changing parameters. Everything was like a layered cake with things built on top of another, and that's also one thing that is great about those libraries, is that you don't have to wrap your head around some different paradigms. You just can use the familiar things like RxJS streams and declarative directives instead of trying to figure out how this thing works with the native browser.
Gotcha. So when you mentioned the notifications API, it was the first version of it which didn't supported push. Gotcha. And by the way, I always just referenced notifications as just calling them notifications, but referencing them as push notifications. I didn't really looked much into this first version of the notifications API. From what I can see, this one only works if the page or the tab, whatever, is still open. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct. It's
Um,
like when you go to some other page and maybe notifies you that it finished some processing.
mm,
That's the biggest difference, because the notifications are mostly initiated by the client code, and the push notifications, they mostly initiate by some service worker, even if your website is closed, something like that. And that's why the API is different. But there are valid use cases for both of those. So we would like to support them all, and ideally in a similar fashion. Even though you mostly gonna use push API to push some server side events instead of initiating them from your Angular app, it's still gonna be better to have the same API to work with them.
gotcha. Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. Nice. Okay. So, of course, we're not going to have time to go over all of them, but anyone who is listening to this, I highly encourage you to go check out this repository and each of these libraries because a lot of them seem very, very interesting. Um, I gotta say, I got really interested in the payment request because the last time that I took a look at this feature, I didn't notice many other applications using it, and then I just let it go. But now that I'm seeing it here, I'm like kind of remembering about that and thinking, maybe that there's something that we can improve in the UX of our product by using that and simplify the payment. And the fact that you already provide a wrapper for Angular is just so much easier. That's
Yeah,
really
that library
nice.
is like one of the first. It's also a good example of using directives to declaratively create an object, because it would work well in checkout page where you see your basket with all the items, and every item is going to be a directive of an item in the payment request, and the button at the end will just create an object for you and resolve the promise. You will just need to provide all the payment providers. I think I don't really remember that API because it was a few years ago, and it was mostly done by my friend Roman, who worked with on Taiga UI. But you can check it out if you have a e-commerce Angular web app. It would probably be helpful for you.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Let's talk about some of the other projects that you have on your belt. So we have Taiga and also Mosquito. I think just for the spirit of talking about utilities, maybe talking about Mosquito first would make more sense since it's more flexible and people can use in their own designs. But
Mhm.
yeah, so what is Mosquito?
Yeah, sure. Mosquito is a library to add masking to your input fields and text areas. Um, it was something we created pretty recently. I think maybe 3 4 months ago, maybe half a year, really. And this is something we've been cooking for quite some time, because we had an old masking library in our Taiga UI library, which we used for input fields for data. I mean, for dates, for numbers, and for credit card numbers. Like you would need to put the spaces between four digits when you enter the credit card number. So, and that library we used got uh, dropped by its maintainer like a few months after we decided to use it, and it had collected some issues that were hard to fix on our side, and the code was outdated with all the new CommonJS and new bundlers and all that. And Angular started to give us warnings about it, and we knew we had to come up with some different solution. And we went and explored other options that we have. There were quite a few of popular libraries, but they all had the disadvantage. Most of them had that they are also supported by open source enthusiasts that could easily drop the support, and we have like a multi-million user base business here, so we cannot really rely on that. And we didn't like the APIs that much. The library that we used was pretty flexible with not much of flags for corner cases, and a lot of masking libraries are looking like a UN convention with a lot of flags to support some fringe cases, corner cases, and all that. And this is not really what we strive for when we design our APIs. So we decided to create our own, and it was not mostly engineered by me. It was engineered by a colleague of mine who also worked on Taiga UI. It was like his first big project that he architected, and me and the other colleagues helped him a bit. And the structure of this library is that it has a very small core library that does not rely on any frameworks. It can be used with vanilla JS application. It's all built with strict TypeScript, but it can work with just basic JavaScript application. And on top of that, we have several packages, one for use with Angular, one to use it with React, and the one to use it with Vue. So they provide simple ways to use them with frameworks, like a directive with Angular and Vue, and React hook for React. And there's another library called Kit, which has a lot of pre-configured masks that you can just plug and use. They have helpers to create them with different settings, like a helper to create a numbers mask that allows you to provide different characters as a thousands separator, as a fraction separator, because we need to support international apps, and every country has a different standard there. And also you can use the helpers to create a date mask with day first, month first, whichever format you prefer. And this library is something that expands upon the core API with just ready to use and tested helpers that can help you start using this library in your app. Most of the things that you're going to use Mask for is covered there. So it's numbers, dates, credit cards, and it's going to expand once we cover more cases, like maybe an email mask, URL mask, things like that. And the core API is very flexible and tiny. It has the array of regex and fixed characters. It has some pre-processors, post-processors that you can use to control the mask better, and some other things that you can explore on the demo portal. It has pretty good documentation there. The main thing that makes this mask stand out, I think, in my opinion, is that it mostly works well with Caret, because all the masking solutions that I've used before at some point had the Caret jumping to different places when you write something that is auto-corrected, like when you type a date and put 32 in a day, and it's changed to like 31 if it's January, like 28 if it's February, and the Caret might jump before the date or at the very end of the string if you edit it in the middle. So these things is what we focused on to get right. And it also works with the Shadow DOM, because the DOM events work a little bit different in Shadow DOM, and some masking solutions have issues there. It also works with server-side rendering, because it does not access any global objects directly. And basically, it's the mask solution that we hope is going to be the holy grail of masking for the web. And we're going to keep improving it. If we find some issues there, feel free to file a ticket. One thing that what got us very excited is that Ionic framework, which is kind of well-known one, started exploring the masking for their new version, I think Ionic 7. And when they were exploring what they can do, they liked our API, and we got in touch with them, and we ended up being their official solution that they recommend on their documentation portal, and examples how to use mask with Ionic fields. And that got us a little bit more exposure. And I really hope more people check out Mosquito, because this is the project I'm really proud of from my team, and I hope people check it out.
Speaking for myself, thus far, every time I wanted input masking, I used iMask, just because it looks like the status quo for input masking libraries. But I gotta say, I was looking at the docs for Mosquito, and it makes me consider the switch very heavily. It's just, I'm just, if it were a new project, I would probably just go ahead and use Mosquito from the start. I don't know if I would just go ahead and migrate the projects that I have, just because I never really had a problem with iMask besides Angular Universal. I gotta say that that was a headache for a while, but then they fixed it. They also have a specific library for Angular, and like a few months after I had my headaches with Angular Universal, they released a new version that worked with server-side rendering. So I don't really have anything to complain there, but I really like how everything is just done using TypeScript. So I have type safety in everything that I import from Mosquito. I also really like that how easy it is to use it with Angular. I can see the code of you using it with Angular, and it's just a simple directive that you add to inputs and text area elements. So really, really easy to use. I really like that. I even and maybe I like it more the fact that I can very easily call the function to format a string directly instead of necessarily having an input element or a text area element. That seems useful. I don't know when I will use it, but that
Sure,
does seem
whichever
useful.
tool helps you to achieve your goal, it's the best. I
Yeah,
mean, if you're gonna use something next time from scratch, you could try it out. Mosquito has a lot of freedom with the API, so it would probably be able to cover any case you use. But uh, what I like about it is that once we finalize some things on our own apps like number mask or date mask, we just release it as a ready to use helper for you to configure the mask. And I believe that with time, there are going to be even more helpers that would be able to just kickstart the development of any mask you might need.
definitely, definitely. But very, very cool. I'm definitely gonna pay a lot of attention to this library. And then the other one that we haven't touched on yet is Taiga. And oh man, every one of these projects, like we could do an entire episode, but
The
that's
flies.
funny. So any one of these projects, we could do an entire episode on them, but let's just introduce Taiga to everyone. And what's interesting is that 2 episodes ago, I think it was 2 or 3, we had an episode with Danny Paredes. I'm not sure if you know him, but he's also very well known in the Angular community. And we talked about UI libraries, like other options of UI libraries that exists besides Angular Material. There's
Mhm.
this association that every Angular developer did with, oh, if I'm not going to use my custom designed components, then I'm just going to use Angular Material. But hey, there are so many options out there. You don't need to use Angular Material. Nothing against it. It's a great library, but there are also other great libraries. So let's start with that. So first, I think the major question that a lot of Angular developers are going to have considering Taiga is why would anyone use Taiga and not Angular Material?
Yeah, that's a question people ask a lot, and I'm not really good at answering that because I haven't used Angular material for many years, mainly because I've created Taiga UI and used it ever since. And I believe there's more components ready for use than in material. And the big thing that I like Taiga for is that it's very composable. So whenever somebody comes to me at work and asks, "How can I make this component if it's not there?" I can quickly throw together a demo of just combining the existing components together. So I really have a sense of having Lego building blocks that you can plug together easily to make something else. So this is a good point for Taiga because we have a lot of different designs, and whenever some component is used in multiple projects simultaneously, we usually try to make it into a component built in Taiga. But most of those things can be easily made using existing ones. So I think it's been a while since we added a new component, really, because there's just like 150 of them, and mostly whichever you want you can build already with like 3 lines of JavaScript and composing directives together. And I think it's probably not that hard to customize in terms of design. We rely on CSS variables to change the colors and border radiuses and things like that. And we started using that even before they were supported by all browsers through the polyfill. It was working even in Internet Explorer before we went to open source. We had supported, but 3 years ago we dropped Internet Explorer support, thankfully, and you can create some different visuals for model windows for your input fields. There, I think there are a few examples on the demo how to customize it. One page even shows how to make them look like Angular material inputs and buttons. But overall, I've seen some screenshots on questions from our users that heavily changed the design. I think it's quite popular among the cryptocurrency platforms. I've seen a lot of screenshots with different apps that work around cryptocurrencies. And overall, I just think it's good to have an option. If you could try it and see if you like it. And most people who tried it gave us a good response that they find it very comfortable to work with. So that's probably a good sign.
I like that. It's more like, hey, it's open source, everyone. So instead of just looking for an answer of using Angular Material or Taiga, just take a look at it, play around, and then you decide. That makes sense to me.
People might worry because there's not much experienced people using Taiga at the moment. We've been around for a couple of years, and we have like 2,800 stars on GitHub or something like that. So it might be harder for you to find the answers for your questions, but we also have a pretty alive community on Discord. In Angular Discord, we have a channel for Taiga UI where we answer questions. You can file issues and discussions on GitHub. We also answer them regularly. So this is something that you can get your help with. I mean, you can try it and ask us if you have issues.
Okay, that does make sense. And in terms of components or other functionalities that Angular Material may not have, but that Taiga has, would you be able to say if there are particular things that you're aware of that Angular Material doesn't cover and Taiga does?
I think there's no input date time in Angular Material, which you can type the time and date in one controller. And also, our controllers like these provide native input fields for mobile. So if you open the page with your cell phone and click on the date, you can configure it so that it would open a native data picker on Android or iOS, and native date time, native selects, which is pretty cool. And it has also a lot of scaffolding around some custom things. I know Material also have Angular CDK library, which has the uh, basic building blocks for things like popovers, drop downs, and all that. And we also have a CDK library. I think we actually released it before Material had it. At least we started working on it before. And this is something I really like about Taiga is that it's built in incremental packages. The very low level one is Taiga UI/CDK, which doesn't have anything related to UI. So you can just use it in any application you want. It just has a lot of helpful directives, helpful services, tools, and all that. On top of that, there's Taiga UI core library, which has the basic components like buttons, basic text field, hints, and things like that. And on top of that, there's Taiga UI/Kit, which is a huge library of all the components built on top of those foundations, like date pickers, sliders, model windows, alerts. There's quite a lot, so it's hard to bring up some examples. You can go check out the demo portal because there's quite a lot of the components are there with examples on different use cases, and also there's typically an API tab for each component where you can just change all the inputs on the fly and see how it affects the component. So I like our documentation portal pretty much.
Also, I can safely say that your library also has charts, which Angular Material doesn't have. So charts are considered to be outside the scope of Angular Material, the Angular Material library. And there are also some really interesting things under the experimental section, which
Yeah,
probably people should not use yet since it's experimental. But I gotta
yeah,
say, some of
I can
them
speak about it a
very
little bit.
interesting.
Experimental is something we plan for the next major release because our previous major release was over a year ago in August last year, and a few months ago, our design team came up with new specifications for several components, and we decided instead of trying to maintain the backwards compatibility with previous API and look of components like we used to do previously with the second major release. Right now we are on Taiga 3, and I think by the end of the year we will make a Taiga UI 4, the next major release, and by that time we will finalize all the experimental packages, so they will replace the components that are right now. I mean, in experimental package you have a button, and you also have a button in core package, but the experimental one is very much simplified. It has uh, much less code there, and this is something that will replace button eventually. But there are also some new components, such as fade in for the text that is overflown. Like instead of putting an ellipsis on the end of the text, you can use a fade in. You can scroll it, and it will go away if you scroll to the end. There are some other interesting stuff, like a directive to hide sensitive information, like a credit card number or something like that, on the screen. Uh, it pixelates that thing there. So I really like the experimental package because this is our chance to refactor old stuff and create some new stuff with all the experience we gathered over the years. And I really like how it plays out. A lot of those components end up mostly like directives rather than components, which is good because they don't have any templates, and maybe eventually we would move them into some framework independent code, like a pure JavaScript basis, like material. I think in Angular now uses the material components that are just JavaScript components with wrappers. Maybe it's something like that is what we will end up in the future, because currently we have also a React library in our company, because some of our projects use Angular and some use React. And of course, we would love to have a single component for both. And maybe this is something that would be open to a possibility after we refactor everything. But that's maybe just the dreams. But anyway, the experimental package is an interesting one, and it's a good exercise. I really hope sometimes to maybe do a master class or workshop on some of those components, because it's really interesting to explore how they are decomposed from a huge task of like a date time input with a data picker, with a masking solution and all that, how you can come up with something like that and not couple all the parts together too much. This is a very interesting topic that I think is not that much covered by the current Angular articles or workshops and speeches on conferences. It's something I would like to explore in the future.
Nice. And yes, the documentation for Taiga is indeed really, really well done. I can very easily play with it and see what happens when I change the options. That I can tell you how useful that is. A lot of times I have to actually install a library and change the a particular option just to actually see the visual results of it. And it's really cool that I can just do it
You
here.
can also open it on StackBlitz. I think every example has a button to open that particular example on StackBlitz, and there's also a general button on top to open the basic empty starter with all the stuff configured already for you. Taiga UI uses Angular 12 for now. In future, we will probably bump it to Angular 15. That's because we have a lot of projects that we need to support, and not everybody has the time to migrate to the fresh version. But the next major release would definitely switch to standalone components, which would decrease the bundle size for sure, and some other cool stuff that came up with recent Angular versions would also be available to us, because a year ago Angular was very different.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, dude, I feel like I'm gonna have to separate some time in my calendar to actually stop and take a look at everything that is here, because I definitely don't want to waste time rebuilding something that you already done an excellent job building in the first place. But yeah, Alex, I think we can start wrapping up here. Before we do, is there anything that you would like to talk about from the projects that you've worked on, or anything else that you believe would be interesting to bring to the audience?
Um, I think the only project we didn't really cover that much, maybe two projects, they are also in Taiga family on GitHub, is NG Polymorpheus and NG Event Plugins. I spoke a little bit about event plugins, but this is a topic that is not well known among Angular developers. This has actually been my introduction to tech writing. This is something I've started to explore one day several years ago. Like, I thought, how does Angular work with host listeners and the events bindings on the template when you write the brackets to listen to clicks and all that? And I started to dig into source code, figure out there's not much written content about it. And turns out it's a easily pluggable system that you can expand with a lot of helpful stuff. So this is something I would probably need to make a tech talk on that or something like that, because it's a very interesting topic that should that more people should know about. It can really make your life easier if you knew about it. And the second library is Polymorpheus. It's a thing that we use a lot in Taiga UI. Basically, when you want to put some content on the page in Angular, you have several options. The easiest one is to use the interpolation. You can put some string on the page, and that is very static because it doesn't have any context. It's just there. And to add some context, you can use a function. Like, you can maybe uh, call a function to retrieve the balance of a user, and the user will be its context. You pass it as an argument and return the balance, or maybe formatted name, something like that. People don't usually like to call functions in the templates in Angular, but it's actually pretty helpful if you use on push change detection and don't do any heavy operations there. Like, if you just do math, logic, or strings, it basically costs like 5 nanoseconds. So it's not going to be a bottleneck. And the more complex stuff would require templates. And the most complex way to do dynamic content in Angular is dynamic components, which you can create with a component outlet. So there's not really much difference between all those four things, philosophically speaking. And we've made a universal outlet which you can pass everything into, and it will just instantiate it on the page. It can accept strings, it can accept functions that return strings, it can accept templates, refs, and dynamic components. So with one single simple API, you can use all of those things, and it's really helpful if you make some flexible components, because it's quite often that you have a specification for some button that has an icon on the right, for example, and after you've implemented everything, designers came back and add an option that the icon can go on the left side, then the icon can be interactive or other things like that, and the API grows. If you code it directly, trying to cover all the use cases, you're going to end up with a huge API. But if you try to work on your components kind of like you work with generics in TypeScript, try to build around something that you don't know about that is going to be provided later, like the template or dynamic component or string, then it helps you build more flexible solutions that you don't have to change that much if the specifications change. So it's a big topic that is hard to explain quickly on a podcast like that, but this is another library that I really like, and we use it heavily in Taiga UI. I think it was the first library that we released as something that came out of the development of Taiga UI. And this is also something that people can check out. Once you start to put your mindset to think in terms of content and context instead of templates or components or strings, it frees your mind from the burden of practical implementation, and you start thinking about more general terms. It's really a paradigm shift when you realize how it works.
Okay, I like that, and I especially like how it gives me type safety into template variables, which has been a headache for a while now. Every time I needed to declare a template to reuse part of my component, I lost the type safety. But it
Mm.
seems to me that this is the fix for that.
Yeah, you can add a directive that provides the type for the template, so it would be type safe.
Nice, nice. And but I gotta say, the ng event plugins, I still don't really understand what it solves. I was looking into the repository, and it says that it provides a more efficient alternative to listen to events that may trigger a lot, such as touch moves, scroll, drag, and etc. But I really don't understand how it's more efficient than just listening to those events directly and just throttling or debouncing, for example.
Yeah, you can throttle or debounce them, but you would also need to take care of zone and gzone, because for now it's still in most apps, and uh, you would have to write some stuff around it instead of just writing the one word in the event listener. Basically, what it does, that particular part of this library, is it allows you to listen to events outside of ng zone. This way, it would not trigger change detection on your whole app, even if you use on push at some components. It would still, I mean, the global event listeners would still trigger change detection in your app, but with this simple post fix, point silent to event, it would not trigger change detection. You would be able to trigger it whenever you need it, and not on every event. Like, for example, if you want to load some more items in your list and you scroll it, the scroll event triggers multiple times per second, and you only need the last one that you would react to load more items at the end. Like if you try to implement an infinite scroll pattern, then all those other scrolls will trigger change detection unnecessarily, and you can quickly work around that by just going outside of ng zone. And of course, all those things can be done with from event in RxJS way instead of host listeners or and things like that. But it's just much more concise if you use host listener. It's like one line, and it's very familiar syntax to other Angular developers. And this is just one part of it, because the other parts, like you can call stop propagation declaratively when you listen to event. You can listen to events in capture phase, like I said at the very beginning, which is something you cannot do in Angular, only in manual from event with RxJS. And you can expand the event listeners from Angular in any way you like. It just depends on what you need. This library has like 5 or so plugins that we use a lot. But if you have some other idea, we can also implement that. There are small helpers like click point self, for example, that allows you to listen to clicks only on this particular element, not on the its nested children, like the clicks that bubble, or click once that subscribes to event listener just for the first callback. Like in the native add event listener, you have options at the end, which you can make passive event listeners. You can use capture phase. You can subscribe to event only once. All of this is also supported by these plugins. So I think it's just something that is much better to show rather than explain. But I don't think we have an option like that.
Yeah, but now that you said it, and I looked again at the code with your explanation, it made a lot more sense. And it's particularly nice. It's a very small little thing, but
Yeah, it's a
it's
quality of
nice
life
that like
mostly, because most of these things you can already do, but it's just much cleaner to do it this way.
yeah, and especially the stop propagation. Um, how many methods do I have that start with event stop propagation
Yeah,
and just
and you need,
having
and you
to
need event just for that in the callback.
yeah, exactly. It's nice that I can just add a listener that already stops propagation. Nice. Okay, Alex. Okay, so now let's just start wrapping things up. Is there anything that you would like to promote? Anything that you're doing? Any material that you're working on? Any project that you would like to promote? You would like the audience to go check out?
I think I've spoken about most of the projects that I'm interested in promoting. Really, I'm not doing any podcasts in future or any meetup speaking, so there's nothing for me to add at the moment. But um, I hope I will jump on some conference this year, maybe, because I had a lot of travels last year and didn't have much time to do any public speaking. But this is something I would like to come back to.
Nice. Okay. Okay. And where can people follow you? Where are you most active?
Mostly on Twitter X. So I think I gave you the link. You can add it maybe to the description of this video when we publish it. But it's Twitter/waterplea. It's water PLEA. That was the name of my music project, which I was working on like 10 years ago when I registered for Twitter first time, but I still use that, the same name.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Alex. And well, for me, I'm only going to promote my company, of course, Envoyed. So if any of you is looking for external help in a project or your company is looking for external help, we can either do staff augmentation, which is just extending the team that your company already has and helping everyone out for a period of time, or we can do entire project outsourcing, which means that you delegate the entire project to us and we take care of it. Of course, we're giving you complete access over everything. So at the end of the day, everything is to yours. And what differs Envoyed from other software development companies is that we are the only company that I'm aware of, and I did my research, that works in a performance based model. That's not project based, it's performance based. It's a smaller scale, which means that we plan our sprints and we assign sprint points to every task, and the amount that we charge is based on the difficulty of each task, which is explained to you in the sprint points. And clients only pay when we actually deliver the tasks and they consider it to be well done. So we're not just going to deliver bad code and say, hey, give me your money. No, you actually need to approve it to make sure that it is what you expected. So we are literally making software outsourcing risk-free for any company, honestly. And yeah, so that's basically it. If you're at all interested in that, we are currently open for new projects that might be obvious, but it's not really, because we try to have few clients and not a gigantic team. Like, I don't think I would be able to sleep at night having to manage like hundreds of developers. I would probably have too much anxiety. So we don't have a lot of employees, and thus we don't have a lot of clients either. And that's kind of like where we like to be. So yeah, if you are interested in that, you want a company that is actually super focused on quality and works in a performance-based manner, go check out unvoid.com. That's with UN, so unvoid.com. Yeah, so that's it for me. Alex, again, thank you so much for being here, dude. Everything that you have done so far for the Angular community has been amazing. Thank you so much for all of these projects that we can stand on your shoulders and just build our things on top of it. And yeah, I do hope to see you again. Please come back more often.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
So, bye everyone.
Bye bye.